the only door that gets us out of this, Paul. And some of it is mixed up, as Amanda's talking about, with the toxic masculinity or the perception of what masculinity is in the manosphere. But that is not real life. And some of this is the extension of disassociating people's online lives from their actual lives. The things that Mike Lee said seem so disassociated from anything a human being does. I don't know if he goes to the grocery store or goes to Costco, but I can't imagine any human being who goes through life saying those things to anybody's face. You know, must have been a Marxist. If you're wheeling your cart through Costco and someone has just heard about or wants to share the pain of a political assassination with an elected official, can you imagine rolling those wide, heavy carts through Costco and Mike Lee saying to someone's face what he said online? I mean, I just, and maybe this is my own wish casting, that in real life he wouldn't be as hateful in the moments after an assassination. And he has taken the comments down, but only after being blasted from all sides. I wonder what you make of this moment.
I wish for that, too, but I think I wish for something maybe even more strategic and more of a priority. We have to recognize that this is a new reality. We are facing a new national security threat environment where this is increasing, it's expanding, and it can get worse. I think we have to look at this as kind of like after 9/11, when people got used to going through metal detectors and higher levels of screening. I think we have to have a national strategy to protect elected leaders of both parties, because the threat impacts everyone. But Congress hasn't really responded, and what they need to do, in my view, is come together in a bipartisan way and do an entire national security review of all elected officials and judges and anyone else in public office across the country, and figure out how to make it a strategic national security priority. Because when our elected leaders aren't safe, America's not safe, our democracy's not safe. And there really hasn't been any kind of a national response to what is an increased threat environment that has been noted by the Department of Defense over the years, has been noted by members of both parties. And if the president won't do it, Congress needs to, because this could get much worse in the days to come.
Well, Paul, the judges are trying to do it on their own. Friend of our program, Esther Salas, whose son was murdered, is trying to do this on her own. But she's trying to do it, and she's making progress because she herself is a force of nature. But she's making progress while Donald Trump is using his social media platforms and his massive numbers of followers to call judges haters who are against our country.
Yeah, and I think the important part to emphasize here is Trump is at increased risk, too. Scalise is at increased risk. Democrats and Republicans are all at increased risk. Now, granted, Trump is driving that threat environment. He's throwing fuel on that fire. He's not toning down the violence. But Congress can treat this as a national security threat in the same way we would al-Qaeda or Iran or other national security threats. Because, again, this is another example of something that has our enemies celebrating. Because a lot of our politicians and judges are vulnerable. We're approaching this in kind of a 1990 or 2000 way, and we've got to approach it entirely differently, and not just as a local issue or a political issue, but as a true national security priority.
How Donald Trump has been an accelerant in so many ways in terms of some of the ugliness in our politicians who exploit it for their own aims and ends.
Paul, you've been nodding at different points of what Eddie's been saying. Your thoughts?
I think this is actually one of the most important conversations in America that's not happening across America. And Eddie and I have talked about this offline, and I think it's starting to bubble up. But we've got a crisis in America around isolated, lonely men, especially. And when you have a country that's got many young men who are angry, who are isolated, who have access to guns, it's a bad recipe. And we've got this brewing all across America. I've spent decades trying to heal the wounds of war, working with people who've experienced trauma. And people need hope, and they need connection. And there are a lot of people who don't have hope and connection right now, and our politics are compounding that. And that's creating, I think, a social crisis. I think it's a public health crisis, and it's a political crisis. But the reality is that the men who get in this situation, sometimes they commit political violence, sometimes they hurt others, most often they hurt themselves. And this also feeds into the suicide rate that we have in the veterans community especially, but facing men all across America. So it's, I think, one of the most central conversations to everything that we're facing right now, and one that Trump has been able to manipulate and turn that grievance into political power in a very dangerous way.
For the guy. It's like, damn, you keep talking big about how you're doing all this for the veterans, but you just turn your back on 80,000 vets that have VA loans. We're back with Eddie, Paul, and Amanda. Paul, you know, we were talking about big, deep things, and I'm going to recruit all of you to have this conversation maybe on the podcast or maybe in an hour-long special when we can really go deep on it. But this is real. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is real people in their own lives, regardless of who they voted for, maybe losing their homes.
Yeah, and this is the kind of stuff that drives people to a breaking point. If you consider the earlier conversation we had and all this confluence of events, think about veterans who faced a kind of moral injury, many of them a deep moral injury on everything from Iraq to Afghanistan to the abandonment of our Afghan allies to January 6th. All of this goes into a big cauldron. And then you find out the VA is going to throw you out in the street if you get behind on your mortgage and eradicate a program that's been successful, bipartisan, and smart. So I think this is another example of where Trump is hitting veterans in a way that is going to get a lot of national attention. It should outrage everyone, but I think there's a bigger message here, and it maybe builds on what Senator Padilla said last week. If they can do this to veterans, they can do it to you too. And I've long said they start with the Pentagon, they're starting with the VA, and then these policies start to cascade down. So they're being callous. They're making it about numbers in terms of money instead of lives and families. And they don't seem to stop. They don't care. They're not slowing down. And if this is how they treat veterans and active duty people, they're going to do the same thing to you. They're just starting with us. There is a silver lining here, though, and I've said this to you before. Veterans are pushing back. The patriotic purge, the folks who've been fired, they're organizing. They were involved in protests. They're running for office at a very high rate. That's a lot of my work now, is encouraging independent veterans to run for office, to enter the conversation, to become leaders. That's happening, too. So I think, in many ways, it's a political misstep by Trump. I think he's screwing up here, and I think he's creating a base that's going to be really formidable for many years to come, because they're not going to forget. They're going to remember if he threw them out on the street, and they're going to tell others, and they're going to bring others with them.